Welcome to the Low Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Guys, really happy. I'm here with Dr. Brian Lenskis and myself, Dr. Tro Collusion. We are here today with Dr. Amy West, who I am absolutely ecstatic to have on. Just earlier this week, we were having a couple phone conversations, and I said that I am the hugest Dr. Amy West fan. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She did her undergraduate medical education at Harvard. She did her residency at Harvard. She did her sports medicine fellowship at Maine, and she is a doctor, a medical doctor who practices physical medicine and rehabilitation, and she'll tell you about that. On top of that, you need to follow her on social media at Amy West MD. She is one of the biggest proponents of CrossFit and anti-corporate influence in medicine that I have come across in this particular field. I've been to ACSM and other athletic conferences, and I've got the feeling that there's corporate influence in these types of conferences. And she's talked a lot about getting rid of the Coca-Cola and Gatorade influence on sports and sports health. She's lectured on glutes. She's a published author. She's edited textbooks in her field. She is a huge CrossFit ally, and she can out squat me and Brian combined. And so if you want to be put to shame, follow her on social media. Dr. Amy West, this is the second time we're doing this. Happy to have you here.
Great. Well, thanks again for having me here. I'm always excited to talk about CrossFit, talk about metabolic health, and find people who are like-minded in the space, because it's frankly kind of rare, as you know. So I appreciate it.
So what dragged you into this space? What possessed you to become a doctor, first of all, and then to go into physiatry, where a lot of people have no idea what that is?
No idea what it is. Yeah. Well, so definitely wasn't my plan at the outset. I actually went to school for film and television production and thought I was going to work in television. So I did for a little bit. I was a television producer, editor. I worked in a lot of music television, worked at MTV. I worked at the BBC in London for a little bit. And at a certain point, I just kind of got sick of the entertainment business for reasons you could probably guess. But also the work is very episodic. You work for a little bit, then you're on to the next thing. And I just, it's not really I don't like that kind of thing. But, and then it sort of occurred to me like, well, I've always been kind of good at school and always, liked studying and things like that. And I said, well, if I have the mind to do it, then maybe there's some kind of greater calling. I should be using that for good in the world, rather than, editing TV shows maybe. So I went back to school and did all my, because I hadn't done my sciences or anything like that. I went back to school, did all my sciences, and was working at a bookstore while I was going to school and trying to figure out how to get on to the next level. And then ultimately ended up getting into Harvard Med School, and that's where I did all my training. While I was there, I did an education degree as well while I was there. And then during that year that I was doing the education degree, it's much lighter load than traditional med school. And that's when I first found physiatry. I never really heard of it. It's kind of the best kept secret in medicine. But one of the biggest rehabilitation hospitals in the country is their Spaulding Rehab, which oddly enough at the time didn't have very much interaction with the medical school. So I had to kind of go seek it out. And then as I was doing that, I found it through a lifestyle medicine interest group. We had a lifestyle medicine interest group at our med school, a small group, and the person who leads that is a physiatrist. And then I said, that's interesting. We sort of are thinking along the same lines, and you guys deal with sports, which I'm super into, and I didn't necessarily want to be a surgeon. So I was like, well, how else can I work with athletes in the sports realm? And she connected me with people at Spaulding. And then after that, I ended up working closely with a lot of the victims from the Boston Marathon bombing who lost limbs. who were doing their rehab process there as I was kind of rotating through the hospital. And it was the kind of situation where I thought like, wow, this is really really impactful. It's also very kind of uplifting kind of medicine to practice, because everyone gets better in some respect. And it's a lot about physical function and how to prevent debility and injury, which is something I'm passionate about. Really focuses a lot on root causes. And then around the same time I got in, sort of found physiatry, I found CrossFit and the principles of focusing on function and functional movement, improving your day-to-day living through moving well, we're all kind of coinciding that the same principles apply to both. So to me, it seemed like a natural fit for me, but also for each other. So now I spend a lot of my time explaining what CrossFit is to physiatrists and explaining what physiatry is to CrossFitters. And so I'm happy to do it, but it occupies a lot of my time.
You know, I don't think we had Rob Wolf on, but we didn't talk about CrossFit. And, you know, I think maybe if you can just give people an idea of what, you know, maybe I can start with saying what CrossFit is, and maybe you can help me.
Yeah.
You know, typically, you know, CrossFit, you know, there's CrossFit gyms and there are CrossFit certified coaches. And it basically teaches the tenets of CrossFit, which include generally a strength component and a metabolic health component, often combining Olympic weightlifting, with gymnastics, with functional movements. You know, the other thing I think that CrossFit, that I've seen in my own patients, and certainly have family members who own CrossFit gyms, they promote a sense of community, I think, that's really not seen in many other, you know, sort of segments. And there's a very strong social connections around it, local competitions, regional competitions, and then, you know, of course, the CrossFit Games. It's certainly uplifting. But, you know, is there anything about CrossFit that I missed there? Help me round it out with a little bit more info.
Yeah. So, I mean, the sort of principles of CrossFit are three things. So constantly varied. So the workouts, you know, every day it's something new, it's something different. It also is total body movement. So you're not just, you know, it's not just legs, just arms, and every day is different. So that's one principle. That's constantly varied. And then functional movement is the second. So functional movements essentially are things that we do in everyday life that we have to do to function. And what that looks like is, you know, something like a deadlift, for example. So like picking something off the ground, moving something from ground to overhead, you know, squatting down to go to the bathroom. You know, those are all things, those are functional movements that are multi-joint, meaning that it's not just, you know, doing this, it's, you know, moving something with multiple joints in multiple planes of motion. Things that we, you know, if you walk down the street, you'll see people doing without, you know, not necessarily thinking about it. These are movements that were not explicitly taught. Like, you know, babies can squat actually very beautifully. If you look at them, like toddlers are able to squat very, very beautifully. And it's some of these movements that we are sort of born knowing how to do innately, we sort of lose as we age, either because we're sitting all day, or because we, you know, get stiff or get injured, or we just stop really moving in those ways. But ultimately, if you lose those abilities over time, you will lose your independence. So to train them is really important. And so that's, you know, where functional movements really are very important for people to be training. And traditional sort of exercise science in the past has been the focus on a lot of single joint muscle isolation things. Like if you go into a standard gym and there's tons of machines there, and
you mean a Globo gym?
Muscles.
Do you mean a Globo gym? Yeah,
I do.
Okay, got it. So if you go to a Globo gym, got it. Okay.
Globo gym, yeah. A lot of those machines, they don't they isolate. There's very focused on single muscles, but also because the whole machine is sort of stabilizing you, things like coordination and balance, they're not being challenged in any way because the machine is doing it for you. So you know, those machines have their place for certain things, but in general fitness, and especially in functional movements, they don't really apply. So we, you know, so one of the sort of ideas in CrossFit is like, we don't need machines, we are the machines, right? So we do those things ourselves. And then the last thing is high intensity. So intensity is something that one is relative to the person doing it. So what's intense for me versus what's intense for you, what's intense for your grandmother are different things. So we can all do kind of similar workouts and have them be intense, but that intensity is different based on your conditioning, your age, your function, etc. And high intensity has been sort of demonized in a lot of the literature over the past few years, or in prior years. And now, sort of recently, there's been a lot of talk about, oh, this high intensity interval training is actually a good thing. And actually, Dr. his name's Martin Gabala, he's published a bunch on this. There's this standard kind of idea of like zone 2 steady state cardio, and then high intensity movements. And the idea is, with that intensity, it's more time efficient. So you can get the same, if not more, benefit from doing something in a shorter amount of time. And as we know, most people don't exercise because they don't have the time to do it. So then to tell people that they have to spend extended amounts of times doing lower intensity movements, they're less likely to do it, and they're also less likely to see results. Whereas with shorter, intense workouts, they're more enjoyable by people. That's been shown in a few studies, but also they're more time efficient. And you're seeing things like mitochondrial biogenesis and things like that as a result of these high intensity workouts. But again, what intense is varies by person. And also the last sort of piece of CrossFit is that it's universally scalable. So meaning that the workouts are adjusted to your abilities. So we all can do the same workout, but the way the movements can be adjusted and changed and scaled so that you're doing them, that we all end up having the same stimulus, but the movements might not look exactly the same. So something very much like for example, like a push-up. There's a regular push-up, and then there's a push-up from your knees, then there's a push-up to an elevated surface, there's a push-up to a wall, right? Those are all push-ups, but and for some people that push-up to the wall is very difficult. And we can all do push-ups, but what they look like for some people is going to be very different. The idea is that we can all do it. So I think there's a big misconception that CrossFit's only for like elite level, kind of crazy, intense people. And in fact, that's what's on the CrossFit Games, but that's not what CrossFit is on a day-to-day thing for people. And then it's done in a group setting. So, and the power of community, CrossFit in some ways is almost like church for people. You go and you see the same people every day. They hold you accountable. If you're missing, they find out where you are. And you make friends as an adult person. To make friends with other adult people is hard, so you're in a group where you're, talking, going to people's weddings and, seeing them outside of the gym and stuff like that. And that's another kind of sort of byproduct of the exercise is the mental health component in this group setting, in this community, because as physicians, like, we make recommendations all the time, but it's not really until those recommendations become habit that they're effective. And in a CrossFit gym, that's a place where these healthy habits and behaviors can be sort of reinforced. And, and along with exercise, nutrition is sort of the basis of all CrossFit, is really discussion. The two can't be separated, nutrition and exercise, to see effective change. And there's a lot of discussion of nutrition and healthy eating habits and things like that in the gym. And a lot of gyms will have like nutrition challenges and have nutrition coaches on staff and things like that. So that's part of it too, sort of another kind of added place where people can be hearing about diet and how to actually do it. Because again, like, we can say, okay, you need to eat healthy. Great. What does that mean? Well, in the gym, they'll tell you. Or go exercise. Okay, yeah, that's great. What does that mean? Listen, you go to CrossFit, they'll tell you what to do. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to say, did I do this today? Did I chest this muscle today? But just follow the programming for a month. They'll tell you what to do, and you'll see results. I mean, I've seen it over and over again. So that's CrossFit in a bucket.
And is it a problem for, people who are 450 pounds who are just starting out? I mean, is that, it's so intimidating going with, you have 6-pack ab people and like, you're like, oh geez, I haven't worked out in 5 years.
Like Dr. West is a 6-pack ab.
Yeah.
Well, that's the beauty of it. So
250 pounds,
Right. But the thing is, like, so it's funny you should bring that up, because I just came from a seminar about scaling CrossFit for larger body people, so obese people. And, those are the people that actually I think CrossFit's the most effective for. I mean, certainly there is an element of intimidation for anybody going to any gym. But they were talking about in this course, for example, talking about how, 8 inches is the size of most landings in most homes, is an 8-inch step to get into it. And the ability to traverse that 8 inches is literally the difference between someone who's like very heavy being able to like live unassisted at home versus having to or have special equipment to get into their house, etc. And certainly things like these functional movements need to be trained, they need to be practiced so that these people are able to do those things in real life. Or for example, you know, and then also on top of that, when you talk about weight loss strategies, you know, you're more likely to do things if you find a community of people who are there reinforcing those habits. You're more likely to also to not get injured. You know, if you have a coach there who's coaching you through the movements rather than trying to figure it out by yourself in a gym. Then you add in the nutrition education that also goes on in the gyms, and it's actually the perfect place for someone who is very overweight to find that guidance that they need. Because I mean, as myself, like I have not always been in great shape. I mean, I've always been athletic, but I actually was not in great shape for probably till I really got into med school and started looking at a lot of this stuff. And part of it was because I go to the gym and be like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm sitting on this machine, then I'm going to go run for this. And it was like, there's no plan. And when you don't have direct planning or direct guide to get somewhere, it's really hard to figure it out on your own. And I think that's what's sort of the beauty of this is just like, hey, just come in and we'll figure it out with you. And, you know, instead of focusing on the weight loss, it's focusing on what you can do with the weight loss.
Yeah, and those little
really
steps
important.
of being able to do things that you couldn't do a month ago. Like just say, oh,
Right.
before, like I have a guy, he came in, he was almost in tears. And he said, I got up off the floor without using a chair or anything to pull myself up. And he said, my whole family noticed. And I was like, wow, like that's
Yeah.
cool. Like, you know, and he's like,
Yeah.
before I was sweating by the time I stood up, you know? And so little
Yeah.
things like that to a lot of people may not mean something. That's a huge mental benefit to people.
Yeah, and that's actually something in the course that they went over was how to coach somebody off the ground who's is very overweight, but also someone who can't kneel on their knees because a lot of overweight people either have knee problems or they have knee replacements and they can't put direct pressure on their knees. How do you coach someone off the ground? And it was actually really interesting. Someone who was there, a participant who's someone who was a very large woman, and they coached her through it. And she was like, wow, I've like never done that before. I never thought I could do that. So, stuff like that, where it's actually the people who actually need the most, who need the need CrossFit the most, are sometimes people most intimidated to go in. And it's really just, I think partly because there's a lot of misconceptions as to what it is and what it isn't.
Can I tell you, I think knowing the space a little bit, I know that CrossFit has come under intense criticism for things that I think are unfounded. Inexperienced trainers has been one of the criticisms. And I just want to tell you,
we can talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I just want to tell you quite the opposite, right? So we're talking about being able to help somebody who's oversized, somebody who's very large, somebody has to lose a lot of weight. I went to a gym near me, okay, and I literally saw a trainer there, okay, in a typical gym, a certified, this is somebody who's NASM certified, a fairly well-known certification, having a 500-pound person do a side plank, okay? So to understand what they're doing, right, they're trying to get, and they said, well, just do what you can do. Right? The incredible load you're having that person do, getting them on the floor, getting them to do a side plank, it was just so, in my opinion, inappropriate, right? This is a standard gym. And then compare that, like I went to, that same trainer had this 500-pound person, doing squats. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, this person at the standard gym has no idea what that experience is like. Right. And it made me feel like, people who are bigger, really are vulnerable in any scenario. And contrast that to this, CrossFit gym. I mentioned, full disclosure, my family member, owns a CrossFit gym, where every single person there is scaled to their ability. Right. If they can't, somebody who's 500 pounds coming in, they're just doing, like maybe a wall sit or something onto a bench and back up assisted, I mean, they are literally being targeted to what they can do. right? And there's very
Yeah.
much personalization. So what do you
Yep.
think about these criticisms against CrossFit? Do you think that they're, is there any I've seen, some data and literature
Oh.
around CrossFit
Oh.
trainers, and their, sort of scientific background. But
Mhm.
help me understand, does CrossFit get a bad rap?
Well, okay. So yes. So first I'll say this, if for anyone who's interested in looking at, any larger people, so there's a great friend of mine, her name is Athena Perez. She's a larger person herself, and she's been involved in CrossFit community for a long time. She has a company called Scaled Nation. It's all about CrossFitting for larger people, and she's the one who ran the course, and she has a website, and she helps larger people get connected with gyms. So anyone who's interested in that, check her out. But so CrossFit, yes. So especially when CrossFit first started, there was this you'd see a lot of articles in the news about CrossFit being dangerous. Is CrossFit dangerous? And there's a lot of things to pick apart. But part of the reason that CrossFit was a bit of a disruptor in the fitness industry, because it sort of went against the grain of traditional NSCA, ACSM guidelines, focusing on function, incorporating things like intensity, things that all now have been borne out in the literature, oddly enough, but at the time were sort of novel concepts, if you will. So CrossFit trainers do not get certification through either the NSCA or the ACSM, which are the two of the largest governing bodies of exercise practitioners. And as a result of that, one can say that there were influences to try to discredit it as a exercise modality, because CrossFit did not opt into paying dues to these governing bodies. And in fact, there were some conversations that were had, that Greg Glassman has reported, who was the founder of CrossFit, that essentially, the idea was that if you're not going to pay into our certification, then we are going to say that you're dangerous, that you're hurting people because you're not certified by us. And therefore, there were actually bills in certain states to outlaw CrossFit as a exercise modality. And to further promote that idea, there were studies published that were found to be false. Studies published that said that there were CrossFit high injury rates in CrossFit. There was a very famous case that essentially CrossFit filed a lawsuit against the NSCA over data that was completely falsified, and it was found out that the data was falsified. The judge ruled, in fact, that the data was falsified, and the judge said it was the most egregious thing she had ever seen in 20 years on the bench, but just how deep that ran, that there was a coordinated effort to falsify, fabricate, and hide data just so that things can be published that said that CrossFit was dangerous. And obviously that stuff was retracted, and there was a big lawsuit. And unfortunately, because when Greg Glassman exited the company, that case was essentially settled kind of out of court. We don't really know what happened to it, but for a long time, CrossFit basically had won this lawsuit, and that showed that the NSCA had lied, and they knew they were lying when they lied.
And then they have to sign non-disclosure agreements, right? And so there's all these things where you can't talk about. Tro, I was just, while you're talking about this, I'm thinking about, remember Keto Crotch? Everyone made this, there was a PR firm that was representing some of the bigger diet programs that said, oh my gosh, Keto Crotch. None of us have ever had anyone ever complain about this. And it just happened to be the vegan doctors who got all these complaints from keto people who weren't, it was just a crazy thing. You go, this doesn't really make sense. Jason Fung doesn't know this. None of us have ever heard of this thing. So, and then it just disappeared when people said this is crazy. But things like that where they slander when you cut into their market share because they go, we got to do something. These guys are, everyone's Googling what this new low carb stuff is, or metabolic health.
Yeah, I mean, it was exactly that. And the fact that they were threatening to close down CrossFit gyms in certain states, to say you know, the evidence shows that CrossFit injures people. You're not certified by us. Therefore, we're going to try to make it illegal. And you know, CrossFit at the time, Glassman had an army of lawyers fighting off these cases all the time.
That is just,
people forget,
it's insane that we have to, you know, go to court so we can help people move, you know, functionally in the space, have a community.
Exactly.
It is,
right.
it is completely insane.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen any compelling data that CrossFit, and certainly in my own patients, I recommend it, you know, often, right? There's a couple modalities that I like depending on the time and schedule. Certainly, I love sort of the high intensity, low volume approaches for the people who don't have the time commitment. I'm talking about Ben Bakikio and sort of the, you know, the Mike Menser based, you know, low intensity approaches to building muscle. But majority of the people in my clinic need help with functional movements, need help with metabolic health, strength. And it's very easy for me to recommend something like CrossFit. You know, another one that I like that's not as ideal, but I think is commercially available is certainly Orange Theory. I don't think it's as good, but you know, for some people, it just becomes very convenient to do something like that. I'm not saying that it's, you know, it's sort of like, you know, some people like their burgers.
If it gets you moving, it gets you moving, you know, it's,
I think just doing what you enjoy. If you find something you enjoy, whether it's Pilates or whether it's whatever, you know, I have a lady who's done well with bar method, you know, it's whatever works for you.
Yeah. I mean, I like to kickbox, right? Like, I mean, I like to kick it back, you know, but
I mean, it's funny now because it's like these, like, I think Orange Theory now has started a functional resistance training class as part of their Orange Theory, and it's like, that's just another word for CrossFit. Right. And I think what's also been really interesting too is to see, you know, I was at speaking of, you know, I believe it was at ACSM. This was almost 10 years ago, and someone was on the stage talking about the importance of, you know, getting kids moving and showing that, you know, kids really need to be doing strength training and functional movements and resistance training, and everyone in the audience was like, wow, this is great. And they said, you know, where could we send our kids to do this stuff? And the guy said straight up, he said, whatever you do, don't send them to a CrossFit gym.
Oh my God.
And in my mind, in the back, and then you look see where this person's getting his funding, and you see where this person's publishing, and it all traces back, it all, you know. So and I even went up to the person afterwards, and at the time I was like a med student or something. I was, you know, and I said, you know, so you're saying functional movement's good, and you're saying, you know, you're saying resistance training's good, and he was even showing pictures of things that look like CrossFit, the kids doing it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what's the problem? Why wouldn't you go to CrossFit? And he very quickly said, well, we don't want people to get injured, and he just walked away. And and to me, that was like, boom, like, you know, you could see the, you know, when you see who's funding it and who.
So you sensed sort of a systemic problem. You sensed maybe interest. You sensed corruption, and against something that has benefit. Brian, where have we seen that before?
Yeah, you see it everywhere. I mean, I just think of Petke and Noakes and all these guys who went. That was my first sitting back saying, "Wow, this is really odd. They're going after this guy for saying not to eat sugary cereal for breakfast. Like, how can that possibly be? You know, the guy who's trying to help people not get amputations. In your case, obviously, you don't want people to be injured. And I think trying to find a way for people to improve their life in a way, and it's horrible when they say, you know, they say, don't do that, whatever you do. And instead of saying, hey, let's look at it. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, we'll find something else to do. And I think, you know, and I was going to ask you this question, I think at the very beginning, when you were talking about the Boston bombing, there's going to be a certain percentage of people, like, and I think what you have to do in your career is have a lot of psychology in that. How do I get this person motivated who just lost their right leg? They used to be a runner. Now all of a sudden their right leg's gone. And, you know, a certain amount of people are going to say, you know, screw it, my life's over. And other people are like, you know, getting in their brain of getting them like, let's teach you your life has changed. How do we make it as good as possible, or that you can be as functional as possible?
An awesome question.
I mean, there's also like a huge adaptive CrossFit community too, which I work very closely with. I'm actually one of the lead physicians for the CrossFit Games for the adaptive divisions. So I saw that as a physiatrist. I said, wow, you know, getting people, you know, moving again who who thought that they couldn't, or keeping people athletic who thought just because they've had some kind of accident that they can't be athletic anymore, is super important because it's part of their identity. So you can't just cut that off, literally. So I see that I'm primarily a sports medicine physician. So I see people get injured, playing sports, but that's part of the identity. So to if someone has like an ACL injury or something like that, it can be really devastating, not just because they're losing the ability to play sports, but they lose that whole community that goes with it. So trying to keep
plus
people
their
involved
body's used
with
to
that.
that intense exercise. So a lot of people, when they
Yeah.
retire from swimming or they retire from soccer, they go through a depression too. Not just
Yeah.
because they're not competing, but part of it's that they're not getting that the feel good chemistry in their brain, the serotonin release and dopamine release.
Yeah, I mean that's part. I mean, also another thing about, I keep bringing up CrossFit. I don't necessarily mean to, but I played sports in college. I played sort of semi-professionally in Europe for a little bit, and you hit a certain age, you play team sports for life, and then you like hit a certain age. Everyone's like, all right, well, now it's time to get on a treadmill, and I was like, I don't really want to do that. I would go to the gym and I'd go on a treadmill and do these machine things, and I hated it. And I'm someone who likes to work out, and I just didn't like it. And then I found CrossFit and I was like, oh wow, like this is fun. There's like you can compete if you want to. It's part of a team again. Like it was just like, for me, it was like, oh wow, this is what. Not to mention I was seeing results because I'd gone to the gym for years and no one ever said to me, oh, do you work? People be like, oh, you go to the gym? I'd be like, you can't tell. Oh, but now I don't think people question that. They should, hopefully not. So
you're definitely jacked. I'm just gonna say that you're definitely jacked. You're definitely jacked.
Well, yeah. So, but I think, but that's and again, like it's not, I came into work a while ago and there's like a cafeteria down the building, and the guy who ran the cafeteria goes, oh, like, what do you do for your triceps? And I said, I don't do anything for my triceps. I literally just do whatever they tell me to do at the gym. And this is what happens. It's like, I don't have like a focused, I'm not sitting there going, did I work my biceps today? Did I do my triceps? No, I don't think about that. So it was, that was part of the community aspect of it and being able to be kind of part of a team again, which I had missed.
I think there's something to be I think we're hitting on it and we're not quite saying it. And I know we all know it. And I think Brian was talking about that mental health component. He mentioned the athletes who get an injury and we have to like reclaim their identity from being an injured person to being somebody who works out despite injury. And then he also mentioned like this idea of the fact that when an athlete gets injured or they retire, there's like this longing of something that they're missing, right? And then you're talking about, also the social aspects that help that same thing. And I think what we're all talking about, and tell me if I'm wrong, is the intense connection between physical health, metabolic health, and mental health. I mean, is that what we're and that there's social components to it? There's a physical exercise component. There's moving your body, and there's the identity component. I mean, is that what we're talking about?
And the community too, having a community who's like there for you and they support you and like, good job, you're doing so much better than 2 weeks ago,
Yeah, and for me, something I've sort of been trying to sort of talk about, at least via my social media platforms anyway, is this idea of like of musculoskeletal health. And it's not just, so technically I work for like an orthopedics department, and there's, yes, if this thing's broken, fix it. If that thing's, torn, then do this. But there's also this idea that your musculoskeletal health is sort of multifactorial. It's not just, it's the tendons, the bones, it's the joints, it's the ligaments, but the state of those and their likelihood to get injured or to recover are very much linked to your metabolic health as well, and that's very closely linked with your mental health. Those things can't be separated. And I've had discussions with Chris Palmer, and he's obviously involved in the psychiatry world and the mental health aspect of metabolic health. And we were saying like, and the musculoskeletal piece of this is very similar as far as how those things are affecting each other. And if you think your blood vessels and your kidneys, your eyes are all affected by diabetes, what do you think your tendons and your ligaments look like? What shape do you think those are in? And yeah, if your knees hurt and you have arthritis, it's like, but there are people who have really significant arthritis who aren't in as much pain as some people who have very minor arthritis. And sometimes the only difference is is their weight or their other medical comorbidities, and you say, okay, there's something to this. Essentially, and especially with like pain signaling pathways and things like that. So they're all very closely linked, and I think where it's easy in medicine to kind of silo those things, but I see this a lot when I treat a lot of female athletes who have a lot of hormonal issues related to their energy intake and their food intake and their nutrition, which affects their hormones, which affects their bones. And if I just treat the bone issue, I'm missing all of this other stuff, which a lot of times is based in a mental health issue. And they're going to keep getting injured, right? So I think it's super important that if we're looking at these pieces, we can't look at them in silos.
I got two comments here. Stress hormones and blood sugar fluctuations, right? These must affect the brain, the connective tissue, the muscles in a very similar fashion, right? Like it's
right,
like,
yeah.
We certainly know about glycation. We know the impacts of sort of stress hormones on a number of tissues, right?
And chronic pain, sleep deprivation, all these things for sure have a role.
I mean, they're so intimately related. And the second thing, I was thinking about was, you talked about the hormonal health of women, and maybe at some point we could, maybe go into a little bit about the musculoskeletal health of our population and women in general. But I think the biggest crime against women in the past 50 years has been this low fat, just dogma. Like if you want to crush the hormonal health of women, put them on a low fat, calorie restricted diet.
Yeah.
Right. And you want to crush their health. That's the greatest way to do it. What do you think? Am I crazy for thinking that?
I mean, I would agree with you. I think there's been so much focus on demonizing fat, and we're not the whole the lack of protein is certainly, as a result of that, has led to hormonal derangements, but also weakness, like fragility in women. I see this a lot in older women whose bone density essentially is in the toilet because they've been told their whole life to calorie restrict, eat low fat, don't touch a weight because it's going to make you bulky. Eye roll. And as a result, even the ones who, as a result, either they're still overweight and just weak, or they're very frail and very thin. And, that's when I see them, is after they've had a fall, an innocuous fall, or they try to go to the gym and they have stress fractures all over the place because, I said the bones are dust, because they've been undernourished for so long. And as a result of this sort of, this dogma that's not been helpful.
How do you think that happens? How do you think
what happened?
That we've gotten 50 years of nutritional dogma, and I mean, you see it firsthand. You're dealing with injury. You're dealing with, I mean, you mentioned the brittle bones. That's very much in the literature. That, let's say, veganism versus compared to vegetarianism, compared to being an omnivore, is directly associated with worsening sort of muscle sarcopenia and osteopenia and osteoporosis. A lot of this is right there in the literature. Why do you think it's not? I mean, were you taught in your education that eating fat and protein is essential to human health? I mean, like that eating a fatty steak is okay, for women.
Yeah.
Did you ever
get
that in your Harvard education?
Not so much.
Neither did I. I'm not like, I'm not saying anything against Harvard.
Yeah, none of us did really. Obviously the nutrition education in medical schools is lacking, but what is there are these very generalized guidelines that are influenced by all types of big food and big pharma influences. And people say that and go, that's kind of, tinfoil hat stuff. But, I look at, for example, the Exercise is Medicine campaign, which is through the ACSM, and, it makes exercise guidelines for the country. And, one thing that CrossFit was very big in was calling out that one of the primary funders of that program is Coca-Cola. They fund your exercise guidelines. And you say to yourself, well, why would they even want to? What does that have to do with anything? And a lot of their focus was funding science that said, you're not overweight because you drink Coca-Cola. You're overweight because you don't exercise enough. You just need to move more, and you can have our stuff in moderation. And they still remain one of the biggest, from what I know, still remain one of the biggest funders of the Exercise is Medicine campaign. Most physicians don't know that.
Along with
Most
McDonald's,
physicians,
by the way.
And then we have heart healthy
McDonald's.
cereals. They get the heart healthy, right? From the American Heart
Yeah.
Association. You got,
And
Honey Nut
that's, yeah, and
Cheerios and things
that's,
like that. And you think, well, how can that possibly be? You just pay some money and you get a little sticker and you're cool.
Well, help me
yeah, and
understand.
that's was, yeah.
Help me understand. We have this exercise medicine program. We have this, all this funding and sports science. And yet, if you look at chronic lower back pain, it has been increasing steadily over the past 5 decades. If you look at osteoarthritis, osteopenia, despite having osteoporosis, despite having a worsening obesity epidemic, osteoporosis rates don't have any sign of ebbing, right? So how do we get more and more frail? How are we, what is your, help us understand, if Amy West takes over tomorrow as the global head of the, whatever, what does our society need, and what do people need to get their musculoskeletal health optimal?
Well, I mean, so it's twofold. So one is addressing the metabolic health issue, which obviously, you are very well aware of the problems that exist with the current kind of food guidelines and who's influencing food guidelines and food recommendations. So, I mean, that's a whole issue unto itself. But then from a pure exercise perspective, the idea of adding intensity, adding weight training and regular, intervals of high intensity exercise and weight training, increasing, protein intake for sure. These are, if you just start with those things, that would at least get people on the right track. I mean, I say, I'm saying the CrossFit prescription, in my opinion, is the best way to go. But as far as, getting people involved in regular habits of doing these kind of movements, I mean, obviously, right now there's been a lot of talk in social media and in the literature about resistance training and strength training for women. It's a good thing. It's like, this is something we've known in the CrossFit space forever. This is not news to us, but now it's finally coming out in the literature, and now people are paying attention to it because the literature is sort of undeniable at this point, right? And similarly with even studies about CrossFit, overwhelmingly that shows that the injury rate's very low. It's actually lower than running. Much lower than running, actually, and there's reasons for that I can talk about, and that's actually unfound in the literature. It's actually something that's been that's actually has a fairly low injury rate, but actually is very effective. And these are kind of things even in the military. For the powers in the military were very anti-CrossFit for a long period of time, and now that they're seeing that, wow, most people who want to serve in the military are too out of shape to do it. Now they're sort of looking at CrossFit. Well, this seems to be working. How do we incorporate this into our training? So it's sort of these like 180s that have happened in the past, 5-10 years, since I started really looking into it. Now people are sort of changing their tune on these things back when we already knew it, and I'm sure, in the nutrition space, it's the same thing. It's like,
hilarious.
Saying, no kidding.
It's crazy.
But at the time I was like ripping my hair out, I knew this.
Ben Vicicchio, he's a workout guy, and he was talking about women lifting weights way back in the day, like in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And like there was articles saying this is so dangerous, this is crazy, women aren't built to do this, and he was showing the benefits. And all these years later, they finally realized, oh, maybe the guy's right, or maybe all these people who are saying muscle strength. And the other thing that comes up a lot too in my patients, I know it does for you too, Tro, is that so many women, middle-aged women, that are afraid to take protein. They go, it causes kidney failure. I'm like, how many of these big muscle guys have gone into kidney failure that in your life, like Arnold Schwarzenegger and all these big muscle guys that are eating way more protein than you're going to be able to stomach? It's amazing how much fear there is over protein. The dogma.
Nutritional dogma.
And that's part of the. I mean, you're asking like, what would I do to change this? I mean, one is you have to get these big food influences out of exercise science, and people would and Greg Glassman from CrossFit was a big proponent of that, but he had the money and the energy and the clout to do it and to call them out. which caught him a lot of heat, but he didn't care, you know. But for some of us who are kind of lower on the totem pole, you can't necessarily, you know, it's a big company with a lot of money, you know, that's coming at you. But part of it is getting them out of the exercise sciences. And, you know, people say, well, you know, you're talking against Coca-Cola, what should be, you know, tobacco is bad too, but tobacco isn't in the exercise science space. They're not influencing scientists to say smoking is good for you. Coca-Cola is doing that. And what it used to be kind of very directly, Coca-Cola was sponsoring things outright. And now they do it through these different organizations like Gatorade, like the Gatorade Sports Science Institute.
Oh, the Global Energy Balance Network. They have, you know, a great article from US Right to Know. If you guys are interested, Gary Ruskin has wrote about Coca-Cola's influence. The AFP is infiltrated. The ACSM is infiltrated. They have, and every single proponent of the energy balance theory of nutrition has been sponsored by this, you know, by this influence. And you're absolutely right. They are the entity that is, you know, governing both nutrition and, you know, our exercise guidelines. And I want to come back.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I'm saying, well, most physicians don't know that. In fact, I just became the chair of the Exercise as Medicine Committee for the AAPMNR, which is the PMNR, our national organization. And the former head, who I took over from, he said, "Oh, why are you interested in this?" And I explained this kind of as I was talking to you. And he had no idea that Coca-Cola had anything to do with any of these guidelines. No idea. And also, there are a lot of scientists and a lot of physicians that are very much entangled within the ACSM, who are very good physicians, who are not like taking checks directly from Coca-Cola and doing fake science. I mean, there are people who I know who are very well-intentioned, good scientists who are doing good work. So I've also had people get sort of offended when I've like, come out with these things saying, well, lemmings, right? I'm not getting a check from Coca-Cola, and but you're a lemming. You are.
But you're a lemming, right? They're lemmings, right? So what we're talking about here is somebody who's not smart enough or doesn't have the time or energy to know what it is they're saying, and they just go with the majority, right? So what your criticism of them is not that they don't mean well, they don't have good intentions. Most people are just useful idiots in a position like ours, right? And including us, right? I mean, I gotta be honest, most doctors are useful idiots. I would say about 80%. Okay, if I had to be critical,
that's being very kind. I think it's closer to 95%, but
I don't think it's that bad.
That's about 90%. I don't know, but the problem is, like, no one does their own homework. They go, CDC said it. This person agrees. They agree. They're all in collusion and they agree with each other. Like, you and I agree on something. They say, well, Tro and Brian says, okay, so it's all right. I'm not going to look at the science myself. And so that it's shocking how, honestly, I mean, I'm amazed at how many doctors I personally know who don't look at the data. They don't look at the science. They go, I just heard it somewhere, so I just keep saying it. Like we all did. Like, if you skip breakfast, you go into starvation mode, you're going to die by lunchtime and your whole metabolic rate shuts down and your body can't handle that. Like, we're that fragile. Like, but we all believed it. I believed it. Like, oh, you can't skip breakfast, your whole metabolic rate shuts down. And then Jason Fung comes along and goes, okay, show me the data.
You know, yeah, it's 1:30.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also the other thing that, as far as like fixing the problem, which is a huge task, obviously, but other than getting the industry out, is then also encouraging discourse without, retaliation. I think that's obviously, as we've seen that.
I got two things I want to talk about, Brian. I know you were like edging on your seat here to talk about the lemming docs, but there's two things there, a couple of things that make sense to me, even in the, and I wanted to bring this up because you talked about CrossFit's emphasis on functional movement. And I think this is one thing nobody else gets. I mean, the Mike Mentzer, Ben Bakikio high intensity approach is great to develop muscle, right? But it's not always, translational. So sometimes I care about the muscles of my patients, but also I care about the movements, the balance, there's a lot of other components. So when I'm crafting that exercise prescription for my patients, I'm considering their bone health, their mental health, their metabolic health, their connective tissue. I'm considering the whole package. And just to give you an example, I had sent somebody, to a traditional trainer. That's what they had access to. They were doing leg press, and they're telling me how great their leg press get. And they're leg pressing, 500 pounds. And I said, that's great. And I said, do a one-legged squat here in my office. I was like, do a one-legged squat. And like, he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. I'm like, so you're telling me you can lift 500 pounds up, but you can't do a one-legged, you can't even go down 5 degrees.
Yeah.
Right? 5 degrees. And the point of this wasn't to make this patient feel bad. It was to show them like, hey, what do you want from your life? And he was very clear. I want to be able to get up. I want to be able to wipe my butt. I want to be able to not use my hands like your patient did, Brian, get up off the ground without using his hands. He wants to be able to do things. He wants to be able to make love to his wife without, getting back pain, whatever it is, right? Okay. And so the thing is that he couldn't even move 5 degrees. So what was the problem? It wasn't a strength problem. It was a coordination, balance, functional. He had not done that movement. And there's certain muscles, accessory muscles, stabilizing muscles that are activated. And if nobody's challenging somebody to go beyond like the leg press, right? They are never going to be able to. I asked him point blank, I was like, if your leg slips, how do falls happen, right? Maybe you could talk about this. If your leg slips, your other leg has got to be strong enough and capable to carry that load to prevent a fall.
Right.
Right. So I was like, how are you not doing this? Well, my trainer didn't tell me. So help me understand, how does this interplay, how do we get doctors to think more critically about this exercise prescription, and how do you evaluate these things in your practice?
Yeah, so I mean, oddly enough, so I had a similar experience yesterday. I actually, the PM&R department here, I work for Northwell Health. They had a physician retreat yesterday, and because I'm always kind of barking about CrossFit, they said, "Oh, we'll do that for like our retreat," So I said, "Great, let's do it." So we all.
How many people there? Yeah, I want to know how many
about
people.
12, about 12.
12 doctors showed up.
Yeah, it's not a huge department, so I'd say, I think that's all that's it. I mean, it's not a huge department here, but including like the department head, like it was actually really good turnout. And I've seen some of the probably some of the worst movers I've ever seen as far as we were doing basic like deadlift and I had to stop. I stopped them and said, "Hey guys, this deadlift, this is equivalent of your patient having to pick something off the ground." And like they hadn't thought about it. They hadn't thought about it that way. And these are doctors of function. These are functional. These are physiatrists. And then at one point we were doing like ring rows, and I was like, "Hey guys, like I don't know if you realize this, but this is equivalent to someone in a wheelchair doing a functional transfer, like how to get themselves out of a wheelchair."
Yeah, getting out of the car, things like that, pulling themselves
getting
out of the car and turning
or
their
like,
body. Yeah.
Or like, bed mobility. How does someone get in and out of a hospital bed, right? Like it's the same movement. And they were all like, "Oh," and like the light bulb went off, And I think even as a physician, I take for granted what people know about functional moves, what they don't know about it. So part of it's just like the education piece of it. And also none of these people had ever been in a CrossFit gym before, and they all thought the same things that most people think. "Oh, that's crazy, blah, blah, blah." And I go, "No, this is what's happening in a CrossFit gym. They're learning these functional movements that you yourself can't do." Isn't that interesting? So another thing, how can you be evaluating it in other people if you don't know it yourself, right? So like that was also another piece of it. Some of these doctors treat pain, they treat,
Oh, you're going to get me started.
So.
You're going to get me started right now because,
I
about this.
I detonated the bomb.
You definitely detonated a bomb. Definitely know about this because I've had chronic lower back pain. I've been very open about it. I had an accident 3.5 years ago. I had spinal surgery in my neck. It got infected. It was terrible. Couldn't move my arm for 6 months. Have systemic atrophy on one side of my body. It's had impact on my lower lumbar spine. And I cannot tell you how alone it felt. Like what you're just saying validated what I felt so much, which was I'm talking to these experts and they have no idea what is actually going on with me. And it sucks because, I know what it's like to have to go against the grain and learn on your own. I had to do it with obesity, but I had to do it all over again with my lower back pain and my lower back injury. And I felt like nobody really knew. How are these professionals, like, how are they? And, luckily, thanks to God, my back pain is getting better. I'm rehabbing in the ways, a lot of what you said to me, which is strengthen your glutes, focus on hip mobility, right? These have been so valuable to me. But I couldn't get this insight from standard physical therapy, from, chiropractors, physiatrists, orthopedic doctors. I had an orthopedic doctor tell me I should just never kick again. Like I told him, she said, "What's my goal?" I said, "I want to kick to be able to kick over my head like I used to. Like I would just like that's what I want to do. She said, maybe just never, you should not do that again. That was her response.
Right. And that's a fairly common response, especially like in the orthopedic world, is like, well, if it hurts, just don't do it. And to me, it's like, well, if it hurts, then do it better. That's kind of my idea. So, when people in my own clinic, when I'm assessing people, it's like, okay, yeah, like, let's think about your functional goals. Like, what do you want to be able to do? And then I do a lot of talking about butts, as you know. So your glutes are essentially what stabilizes you when you're in a single leg stance. It holds your hips up, it stabilizes your butt, it stabilizes your spine. It also helps your knees track correctly. It prevents your knees from caving in. And most people, I'll say most people that I encounter, including athletes, cannot stand on one leg without falling over. And they say, oh, I have bad balance. Now, unless you've had a stroke, it's likely your balance is fine, but it's your stability. It's off. So how that manifests is people have knee pain, back pain, hip pain, outside of the hip pain, particularly like their butt hurts. And part of the reason is they're not able to stabilize themselves on one leg, and especially in runners. So runners especially are prone to this because running is all in this plane of motion, and those muscles are most activated in side to side motion, which is not something we do as people very often. We don't go side to side, we go this way. So runners, essentially, when you're running, every step is a single leg squat when you think about it, right? So if you're not able to stabilize yourself when you land on one leg, you have this moment where your knees caving in, your hips are dipping, your spine is kind of twisting. And you imagine that over a long run, you're doing that thousands of times, and then you wonder why your knees hurt, right? So, and I see this a lot, especially in women tend to have very
or lower back hurts. I mean, you just described
or your
probably
back hurts,
the mechanism of my lower back pain.
Yeah, exactly. So the low back, people have hip pain, back pain, knee pain. As a result of this, I see a lot of this in women because women in general, the way our legs are shaped kind of make us more likely to have that kind of angulation, but also the glutes are somewhat ignored. Women tend to be more quad dominant and the glutes kind of shut off. I see this a lot in runners, like I was just saying. And I see this a lot in elite athletes who are super strong quads. If you're not squatting, if you're not doing things in a single leg stance, lunging, or activating the glutes properly, they just kind of go away. So, that the way to activate them primarily is in a physical therapist that doesn't necessarily know what they're doing will have you move your leg out to the side, which actually you can cheat your mostly your gluteus medius. You can not actually use it at all by moving your leg out to the side. So when you move your leg out to the side and then behind you, that's what activates it. And if you're not practicing things like that, often, the treatment, if you're missing that piece, you're not going to get to the bottom, to get to the bottom of why you're having the back pain or the knee pain or the hip pain. So I see it a lot with physical therapists. Like, I there are great ones and often they tend to be ones that are not insurance based, that I have a lot of confidence in. If I see someone with that problem, that they will fix it. Whereas if I send them to sort of run-of-the-mill physical therapy, it's sort of 50-50 if it's going to work, because the physical therapists are restrained by what insurance tells them they can do. And, they're putting heat and ice on people, and that's great, but that doesn't really fix anything. And, so it's part of the treating is identifying the problem, but then finding someone who's actually going to treat it. And then often transitioning that beyond the physical therapy to a training program. And that's where, you have personal trainers, but, things like in CrossFit, for example, where they're doing squats on a regular basis, so you're doing single leg movements, lunges, etc. So you can maintain it once you've finished the kind of acute painful period. So, yeah.
I just wish somebody could have looked at me and said, you have terrible back pain. Hey, you really have to strengthen above and below the joint. You have to mobilize above and below the joint. You have to take pressure off of it. Like, this is exactly what you need to do. And it's not like, and it's tough. It's tough to get that. Like you said, I think the real good people probably don't take insurance because, they just make you be worse. Insurance makes you be worse. Imagine like having to do these excess modalities just to bill more so that you could, actually care for somebody.
It's time. It's they don't allow them the time. And then,
or complexity.
They don't necessarily, it's just, it's so, that's why when people come to me and they say, I've done physical therapy, it doesn't work. Like, okay, what did you do? Go stand on one leg. Oh, you can't do that? All right. Yeah.
I have some great therapists and they do miracles. It's just hard to find the right people. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
like it's just like anything. Like when they say CrossFit's dangerous, well, it depends who your trainer is, and like there's bad doctors, there's bad of everything. So you're gonna find
Yeah.
someone who's doing dumb stuff and they try to tweak it their own way or do whatever and hurt people. And I've seen it
Mhm.
across the board. With physical therapy, I've had people come out worse after physical therapy if they don't have a good
Mhm.
therapist who's trying to get to the root cause. But I got to ask you
Yeah.
one question with, one thing that's come to my mind a lot is like my most frustrating patient is the one who's had a hard life. No one believed in them. And they've had this
Mhm.
self-doubt, and you try to get them to exercise. You go, okay, let's get you to do, Ben's workout. Oh, but I have bad knees. Okay, how about if we just do upper body? Oh, but my shoulder hurts. And then how about we try swimming or walking in the pool? Oh, the water's so cold, or it's too cold outside, so I can't actually. And like all these excuses, you go, oh my gosh, I just want to
Yeah.
grab you and I want to help you, but I can't help you unless you
Mhm.
do something. What do you do with that person?
Well, I mean, it depends, right? So, I've had it. I've had 22-year-old girls say to me, "I can't do that. I have bad knees." And I said, "Have you had a major surgery on your knee? Is there some reason?" "Oh no, but like every time I squat, it hurts." Okay, so you don't have bad knees, all right? So let's break that down, you know. So then sometimes it's sort of breaking down these like ideas of like they sort of identify themselves by whatever injury they've had or condition they think they have, and then it's like, oh wait a second, no, you just and like for example with that girl who told me that, I said, okay, let me do a single leg squat, and she was like all over the place. I said, okay, see, that's the problem. You need to work on that. It's not your knees aren't bad, and I don't know who told you that or what made you think that. It's just that you're weak here, and that's the issue, right? So
Mm-hmm.
some of it is sort of like if there isn't a true kind of pathology that is preventing someone from participating, is like dispelling that myth right away, or like, oh, I have a bad shoulder. Do you have a rotator cuff tear in there, or you just like it just hurts when you move it, or like what's actually going on, and sort of breaking down and like dispelling, kind of the fears that exist. Like, I see it a lot too with people with back. Oh, I have a bad back. Well, what's actually going on with your back? Okay, this is not dangerous. What's happening right now? So therefore, you can do stuff. I think a lot of times people come to me as like or like an orthopedic provider, and they're just like looking for that like clearance of like, oh, so I can do it. It's not going to make it worse. Or I say to them like, okay, it might make it worse. What is your alternative? I see this a lot like meniscal tears, for example. What's the alternative? If you can do nothing, and yes, maybe it won't get worse, or you can actually participate in life and do stuff, and maybe there's a risk it does get worse. But what, you want to just sit around and do nothing? Okay, your choice, right? So I mean, there's that piece of it, but then there's also, for the person who's got a multiple excuse. And this happened yesterday. So one of the physicians said, "Oh man, this was great. I love this CrossFit. It's great. I don't know. I'm so busy and I got time, but I would love to do this, but I just don't know." And I just looked at her and I said, "Aren't you worth it?"
Mm-hmm.
She was like, "I don't know." I was like, okay, well, if you don't think you're worth, that's a whole separate story, right? But like, part of it's like you can make excuses all day. A lot of times it's priorities. A lot of times it's like if
Self-care is
people are really,
tough.
yeah,
Self-care
and
is
if
tough for
people,
people, you know?
yeah, and
And
it's
especially
at certain,
doctors.
right. And at a certain point, like if you're really just not in a place where you want to do it and you're going to find excuses not to, like I can only push you so much before you're just annoyed. But again, it's like focusing on goals. Like it's like, hey, well, okay, maybe you're not super into this or that, but like, what's something that you're not doing now that you want to do? It's like, okay, well, here are things you can do to get there. And if you still have an excuse, I at a certain point, I go, okay, well, that's your choice. I mean, people say that to me all the time. They come in and they go, oh yeah, but like I can't, I would do that, but this, this my knee's hurting, blah blah blah. Or I would go to PT, but I don't have time, blah blah, and they'll be complaining about something hurting them. And at the end of the day, I say, listen, my knees don't hurt, your knees hurt. So do you want to do something to fix it or not? Because I will guide you, I will help you. My knees feel fine because of the things that I'm doing. So I'm happy to help you with that. But at a certain point, you have to kind of say, all right, like I'm going to do something about this. So, but there's ways to finesse that conversation, obviously. But it's just
I think it's
you can only
tough
help people help
because
themselves to a point.
I mean, I what I think is tough is you're in this department where I mean, the way the insurance and the way people seek out medical care, like you kind of don't know. Like if I was in a medical practice, like in a hospital system, I would put like a poster up, like if you want to completely radically transform the way you're living, ask me how, right? And that would be like, because it's so hard. Like you probably see 40, 50 people a day. And how do you know who is just like needs a little bit of care versus somebody who needs like thorough sort of needs like every bit of insight that you have? And it's so tough, like for the person in a typical medical system, because I think most people aren't looking for like you said to yourself, you know, you're worth it. Like, you know, I don't know that most people in a standard clinic, like, that they're ready to hear what they need to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It could hit them hard, you know, like, and it could even discourage them. Like if they're not ready for that change and you're like, you need to go to CrossFit 3 times a week, you need to eat this and that, right? You need to like, you know, like to get your knee pain.
So I'll say this. I don't, it usually starts off of like, what's bothering you? What do you want to be able to do that you're not doing? And then it's really a conversation around that. It's not like, okay, now go to CrossFit, do this, but you know, it's like that's so beyond where I ever even begin to talk about with that stuff with people. And often I usually get a sense of like when people are asking me like, oh well, what is it that you do, or like what can I do about this? You know, I'm frustrated because I've tried this and it doesn't work, and I've tried that. When there's like a little bit of buy-in on their end is like, because a lot of I'll say most people I see are like, hey, my knee hurts, I want an injection, and I want to leave. Like that's that's the vibe, you know, and that's fine for certain people if that's what they want. But you know, ultimately, like it's really up to up to the person, you know, as I talk to them, I sort of feel them out as to how much it seems that they want to kind of input on their end versus what they just want me to do to them, you know. So
yeah, like
so
I'd want a poster being like, do you want to, you know, are you looking for an injection and pain relief and just that's it, or do you want to radically change everything, you know, and get rid of this pain for life? Like I want the people that, and I want to be the doctor that makes this latter happen. I want to be, not that I don't want to ignore the first part. You know, and I want the patients who want that too. Right. Like that's what
don't we all, right?
You know?
Yeah. I mean,
we need to make it like, that's what in these systems that they've made for us in these hospital settings and standard clinics, like how do we peel that layer back? Like I would put a poster up. I'd be like, you know, there's like a cartoon. Maybe I'll dig it up and I'll send it to you, Amy. It's like, you know, who wants a quick fix and pills and surgery versus like lifestyle change. There's like,
right, exactly.
But we need to make that. We need to make those windows like, hey, here's the other window, right? This is where I like actually take care of you.
Right. And I think that's kind of, I think it's a lot of just, you know, sort of personal responsibility on the patient's part. I mean, so that's part of another reason why I espouse the CrossFit community, because you have a bunch of people there who are trying to make themselves better. And what has been frustrating for a lot of people in that community is when they seek out medical care, it's with, you know, they end up dealing with a provider that ultimately is used to dealing with people who don't want to be active in their own healthcare, and they get that sort of same treatment, which is very frustrating to them. Right. So like, or for example, when I do see somebody who's like wants to, you know, who's got weak glutes and their low back's killing them and they just want to get back to the gym, and 90% of the people that they've seen just said, well, just don't go to the gym anymore. Just don't lift anymore. You shouldn't lift weights anymore. That's dangerous. And the person's like, no, but this is what keeps me going, you know? So that's where those patients are super exciting to me, because I go, oh, great. I know the perfect physical therapist for you. I know the coach that can work with you, and I can help those people. And that's like the most gratifying part of what I do on a day-to-day basis. But those people are one in every 200 that I see maybe. But it's like when you do find those people, it's really exciting for me because I know exactly who to set them up with. But in general, I mean, I've even had a few women that I've seen that are older women who go to the CrossFit gym, and one of them said, yeah, you know, I feel so good when I'm there. And then, you know, she had this issue, and she was saying, and my doctor just told me not to go back there anymore because I'm going to hurt myself. But she's like, that's the only time I feel good. And I was like, don't listen to that person. Stop. Like, you know, but, so stuff like that. So like, it's definitely a minority, unfortunately, of people that I deal with. But when I do find them, it's like, oh, great. Let's help you. Cause I know who to help you. I know who's going to help you.
Yeah, I know exactly the feeling. Dr. Amy West, we're going to have to call it here. I think it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been an hour and some change. How do people find you? You know, if they're a medical doc and they're interested about CrossFit, if they are a patient, if they just want to interact with you and follow your, follow you on social media, how do people get in contact with you?
So the easiest way is either through Instagram or Twitter. It's at Amy West MD, just as it sounds, on those platforms. Hopefully within the next year or so, working hopefully with some things with CrossFit as far as launching some sort of formal network of providers. So keep your eyes out for that through CrossFit's platforms. And I see patients for I work at Northwell Health in New York. So I see patients in New York City and Long Island. So it's another way if someone wants actual treatment, can find me via their websites. And then I'm involved in all kinds of things. Exercise,
we got to get you. We got to get you.
Adjustment,
we got to get you lecturing at the SMHP. That's what we got to do.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I'd love to talk about talk about a lot of many things I could talk about there. So I would love to. Also, another thing I was going to add, I don't know if we would edit it later. I forgot to explain what physiatry is, so that might be helpful.
Yeah, go and tell us now. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Is Jack going to be able to put this in the front? I don't know. We'll see.
Figure it out.
Jack, do your miracles.
People will listen to the whole thing. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, but so I'm a doctor of physical medicine and rehabilitation, also known as physiatry, depending on where you are in the country. People call it physiatry. We have many different names, which is why it's confusing to most people. But we are MDs or DOs, medical doctors we're not physical therapists, we're not podiatrists, we're not physiologists, we're not psychiatrists, physiatrists. And what that is, primarily we treat the musculoskeletal manifestations of disease processes on the body. So what does that mean? We don't necessarily treat the primary thing that's ailing you, whether that's like cancer or heart disease, but we treat how those conditions affect you physically, and we focus on your physical function. Things, I use the example of cancer, for example. We're not treating the cancer. We don't prescribe the chemotherapy, the radiation, but we do look at how both of those things will affect how you're functioning day to day, your pain, your ability to move, your ability to go to the bathroom, things like that. That's what we get to focus on. We also focus on essentially injuries, whether those are permanent injuries like a spinal cord injury or traumatic brain injury, or more temporary injuries like sports injuries. And that's what my specialty is. And we basically look at, musculoskeletal health and function in day-to-day life.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks so much for joining us. Great information for us and our listeners. Greatly appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always a good time.
And Tro, good seeing you, man.